Okay,
Sure.
cool. So this is an end user panel. So while I read the questions that I was just sent, I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves.
Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm Snow. I work for Square on their traffic and observability team. Been working on building out, migrating us towards using an Envoy service mesh for the last year or so. I'm also an Envoy maintainer.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I'm at Salesforce. I work on our service mesh team. We've been building a service mesh for about 2.5 years now, and really been through from service meshes from the beginning, and have kind of learned a lot of interesting lessons along the way.
I'm Ben. I'm from Yelp. I'm on our engineering effectiveness team. We do a lot of things, but one of the things that we do is deal with service meshes, I guess.
Cool, thank you. So the first question is, I guess could you briefly describe to everyone what types of workloads are you currently running, and maybe stuff that you aren't running but you're planning on running, and I don't know, maybe just talk a little bit about why the service mesh is useful for running those workloads.
So for us, we're using it for service-to-service traffic. Our main goal for using it was to simplify the story for talking between services within all our different languages, applications. So we have hundreds of different services written in like 3 or 4 different languages. All of this we wanted to just give all the app owners a consistent way of doing service-to-service traffic. So that's the stuff that we've been working on and rolling out over the last year. We're also starting to look at putting Envoy on the edge. Right now we're running like a homemade Netty-based reverse proxy, and we're kind of looking into replacing that eventually with Envoy to kind of complete the mesh and use it everywhere.
Sure. Today at Salesforce, we use Envoy for a lot of our east-west traffic inside of our data centers. We have many properties at Salesforce from a whole wide range of acquisitions, and we're looking to bring them all together into service mesh. Our main CRM application, we use service mesh underneath to hook all of the microservices together along with our monolith and get all these different components working together seamlessly. We use it for all of the reliability and observability and survivability features that you get out of Envoy. It's important to us to move all of that kind of stuff out of application code, as was talked about earlier. Get it out of the application code so your app devs don't have to think about retries and circuit breakers and networks and all the things that can go wrong. Additionally, we're working towards making Envoy our north-south traffic as well, getting it up to our edge gateways and such.
So at Yelp, we actually have kind of an older service mesh I guess, term, before that term was coined, based on HA proxy. It's actually worked pretty great over the past few years, and it's gotten us from our monolith to now where we probably have too many services. But we decided about a year and a half ago that we've kind of stretched that to the limit. We've extended our existing HA proxy smart stack based solution to have fault injection and everything, and locality based routing and whatever. But we've kind of stretched it to the limit, and Envoy is now at a point where it kind of does all of this stuff really easily and very reliably. So we're swapping that out for service-to-service traffic. For edge traffic, we'd like to look at Envoy to do this, but it's not really a priority right now, I guess. It's not going to give us that much more than what we have already.
Cool. I was sent these questions, but I'm just going to go totally off script. So I'm curious. So we've talked obviously about synchronous traffic. I'm just curious, are there any use cases where you would want to do something like Kafka or something through Envoy? It's come up, and you can say no. I'm just curious if that's come up in terms of the synchronous versus async bridging, if that would be an interesting thing or not.
It has not come up for us, really. I think so. We've primarily been keeping it. We already have a lot of infrastructure built out around supporting all of the various protocols, so we haven't really looked at Envoy for it.
We've been following we've been following the work item for adding Kafka support to Envoy diligently.
But is there something that you would, like, what would you want it to do in a perfect world, I guess, because there's so many things that it could do.
Our customer, the people that come to us on the service mesh, they want to be able to find Kafka and find the right Kafka using the same kind of abstract service discovery names that they use to find their services. Ideally, finding, the great thing about the service mesh is it helps you find your resources without having to be tied to DNS and be tied to the network infrastructure. But then suddenly you want to go use Kafka or a message broker of any kind, and oh, now you got to know the IP address. Now you got to know the ACLs. Now you got to know. So you lost all that magic of the service mesh.
Cool.
Yeah, nobody's actually asking for that, but I think a case that I guess what I hear a lot is that even though nobody's asking for it, once we give them these things, they love it. So I think for Kafka specifically and various protocols like that, stats are kind of the big thing that we're missing right now. Actually kind of just standardizing stats for even the HTTP traffic is something that people are looking forward to. We do have a lot of our database traffic running through Envoy right now, just because Envoy handles, I guess, persistent connections and kind of handles the service discovery part way better than what we had before. So yeah, we are starting to send more protocols through Envoy. Yeah, Kafka would be really cool.
Cool. All right. Oh,
we have a mandate to mutual TLS all the things, and Envoy is by far our easiest path to mutual TLS because Envoy deals with it, and it's not up to all of the different databases and other third-party products that don't necessarily have good MTLS support built in. Like, we don't have to try to shoehorn MTLS into old open source. We can just put it into Envoy. And so the more protocols Envoy supports out of the box, or even just dropping down to TCP-based services, we get MTLS for free, and our infrastructure people and security people love that.
Cool. Did you have anything else?
No.
Okay, so switching topics slightly, as you all obviously know, Envoy has only been open source for 2.5 years, and rightly so. I think a lot of people are skeptical about quality, reliability, all of those things. So I guess, I don't know, could you give your perspective on what about the project made you comfortable trusting it to do what you're doing with it when it's relatively new? I think that would be interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, so just to kind of touch on how we ended up choosing it, we kind of looked at it and found that we were first attracted by the XDS API, being able to configure it remotely, centralized control plane, all of that stuff. And then as we started using it, we found that, as we started testing it locally, and at the time it just was way better than the in-house sidecar implementation that we already had. It was faster, it was easier to reason about, it was much more performant. So over these last year, I don't think we've had any issues with Envoy's performance or correctness beyond us misconfiguring it. So we've just been able to generate a ton of confidence in it because it's just never gone wrong. Obviously there's bugs, there's been issues, but in general, we have had no performance issues with it at all.
We adopted Envoy pretty early on. The fact that Lyft was using it internally for a while before you open sourced it was heartening to us. So we knew that there was already a proof point that this was a project that a major company that had a lot of traffic was using successfully. So that helped us kind of agree to adopt it. And then we've been running it in production. We ran it in our test environments for a while, ran it in production, and did a seamless migration from Linkerd over to Envoy, and no one noticed. It's been solid.
For us, we started, I did we have these hackathons, and I did a hackathon project to see what Envoy would look like if we replaced HA proxy in the service mesh with Envoy, and I immediately hit a bug, a performance issue, and that was kind of scary, but it ended up being that Matt fixed the thing within a day or something, and I think I've had 2 or 3 other issues that we've seen where I hit some weird use case, it might not be a bug or whatever, and it gets fixed I don't know, sometimes within hours. So the strength of the community is very much builds confidence in us using Envoy. I mean, we're comparing this with Nginx and HA proxy, which we use both, which have been around forever. So it's hard to make the case that this new thing is going to be as reliable as that. But when you have a community that is active in Slack and active on GitHub and will help you out, it's a much easier case to make. And we run on master. A ton of companies run on master. Master quality is very good, and that's great. So we've had really no issues since then. I don't think it's ever crashed. Most of our issues are, again, like Snow said, with our configuration.
I'd also like to echo that the strength of the community is a major thing that keeps us, made us really trust working with Envoy. The Envoy community has been really open to outside contribution and outside bug fixes, and really friendly and easy to work with. One of my team members has been very active in contributing to Envoy, and he's had a really good experience. And we've always found the Envoy community to be very responsive.
Yeah, and similar to what everybody else is saying, just the fact that we had a lot of confidence in whatever issue we ran into, we could get fixed. So so we were very confident that even if you would run into issues, performance or behavioral things, open up an issue and you talk about it, and you get feedback within the day, and it's a very fast turnaround. And I've been able to go from seeing an issue, like a feature disparity, whatever, to having a fix within 4 or 5 days, and then we deploy it to production. And being able to do that and getting people that really understand the subject matter, like Matt, to review the code so that you're very confident that it's a good fix and it's a scalable thing, made us even more comfortable running it, because it is not us making our own thing at home. It is being vetted by people who really understand the proxy domain.
Cool. All right, let's switch to the fun one. Could you each briefly tell us your biggest production horror story with Envoy?
I can tell you 2 cases, the same case, which is that we've DDoSed ourselves twice with Envoy. The first was we misconfigured health checking, and we had Envoy health checking the services themselves. Envoy can actually do health checking caching where it sits in front, and Envoy can take pretty much whatever traffic you send at it. But our services cannot. So when you health check your services from thousands upon thousands of other services, you get an n-squared health checking problem, which is basically your own botnet. Yeah, we didn't take down production, but we did take down our entire development environment.
So we're always very careful at Salesforce. We say trust is our #1 value and all that. And we take that very seriously. So we test very thoroughly in our pre-production environments. So we've never had a production outage because of Envoy. We have hurt ourselves in our internal development environments for brief periods of time. And I would say we implement our own control plane. So we took the XDS control plane APIs and we built our own internal one. And they're not trivial to implement. And there's actually a lot of interesting state management you have to consider when you're building your own control plane and orders of operations and such. So you can do something like you can create a service, and then if you reboot your control plane, you can tell the Envoy that that service exists, but it no longer has any endpoints. And Envoy would, and I think this has been fixed. It definitely has been fixed because we've helped fix it. It will happily say, oh, okay, all the endpoints went away. There's nowhere to route. The route is dead. But and that was actually a control plane implementation issue on our part, and we fixed that on our control plane. And now one of the things we really have found excellent about Envoy is when our control plane, say, crashes because we glitched it in our development environment. Like, the Envoys just keep humming. We've had control plane issues that have gone on for weeks, and we didn't notice them because Envoy will just happily keep doing whatever you told it to do last when your control plane vanishes or is recycling every 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think we haven't had any like production outages. Probably the biggest issue we had was giving, with Envoy, we gave people the ability to control traffic flow. So something that had previously been using a static IP was now, the app owner could kind of enable and disable hosts for that, which at some point caused our like internal SSO portal to go down because using the UI to update this, they they disabled the service that it depended on, which broke the SSO portal, and then everything was down for like a few hours just because we had added in this like dynamic configuration option for app users, and we didn't have the right safety guards in there, which caused a internal outage because somebody like misconfigured something. That's the biggest issue we've had, and again, it's not about the process being overloaded or whatever. It was about our configuration of it not having the right safety guards in place.
Yeah, so one of the biggest questions that I get from potential new users is, where do I get my control plane? So one of the things I would love all of you to answer is you have all built your own control planes. And you probably did that because you're fairly early adopters. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you were to talk to a new Envoy user today. How would you counsel them to think about whether to build their own control plane either on top of Go control plane or Java control plane, or should they go use a vendor, whether that be AppMesh or Istio or something else?
Yeah. From our perspective, it seems like the biggest factor depends on the complexity of your current service discovery setup. If you're starting from nothing, you probably shouldn't build your own control plane because you can find vendors, you can find managed systems that can do it for you. If you do have a existing service discovery and routing system in place that you need to mimic, or if you have, so in our case, we had our homemade RPC library that had very custom retry mechanisms and hedging and all these kind of things that we needed to support, and knowledge of backing topologies and all that kind of stuff that we need to support. So we need very specific behavior. And we also had an existing Zookeeper-based service discovery data store that all the data was in, the registration pipeline, all that stuff was already working, was in place. We didn't have to touch that. So for us, it made a lot of sense to put a control plane in front that consumed this data and generate the very custom behavior that we needed. So instead of us trying to find some managed service and beg them to add in all the features we need to do our very specific behavior, we built it our own, and it's worked well for us, and it's been able to let us have full control over it to very effectively mimic the behavior of the old system, which again has allowed us to roll it out without people really having to care whether or not we're using the old system or using Envoy.
When we started building our control plane, Istio was already beginning to be. And so we decided we were going to start building our own control plane, but only do the bare minimum necessary to get the service mesh running with things like, we started with just implement service discovery. Since then, we've added some additional features, service protection, RBAC. We've started to add some of those. But it was the bare minimum. Just get your envoys configured and give them their discovery information. If you're starting greenfield, don't build your own control plane. They're complicated, they're fiddly, there's state, there's ordering. The XDS APIs are very well documented, but there's still there are edges. Istio is also becoming progressively more mature, and we're now in the process of converging Salesforce onto open source, pure open source community Istio. Like, our goal is we don't want to own forks of anything.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as Snow, where we have a pretty simplified view that developers interact with. So like, we don't want developers to think about this massive YAML or whatever. Like, we want developers to have a pretty simple, opinionated, like a small set of options of how to configure their services. And this makes it so that developers can like spin up services really easily and don't really have to think about it all that much. So our existing system had this, and we built a control plane as like a, I guess like branch by abstraction type thing, where we can swap between our old HA proxy based system and Envoy without the developers knowing. And that's exactly what we do. We're actually kind of partially on Envoy, and we could do it very gradually, and the developers don't know the difference. And that's basically our main goal.
Cool. Is this session 30 minutes or 40? Sorry, what? 30 minutes. Okay. I definitely know what I'm doing. Great. No, that was awesome. So I guess I can ask one more question, but we have just a couple minutes left. Is there anyone out there that would like to ask a question of these folks? Nothing. Sorry, what? No. Okay. So yeah, I guess my last question in closing would be, I've heard all of you talk about, you've had issues because the configuration is complicated. And, from a project perspective, we're always having this tension point of people want to do a bunch of complicated stuff, yet people also want very simplified configuration that is impossible to get wrong. And I guess, at least from my perspective, it's almost impossible. You can't satisfy both camps, I guess, which is why personally I think that you have to have layered abstractions on top that get more and more opinionated. Anyway, I'd like to hear each of your thoughts from an end user perspective on either, what could Envoy do to make it more accessible to people, whether that be better documentation or better error messages, or any other thoughts that you have for people to help them maybe not hit some of these rough edges.
Yeah, documentation and examples would probably be the biggest thing. A common thing is people complaining about lack of complete examples of how to do things. You can often see examples of specific maybe specific filters, but people are like, but how do I do HTTP2 or how do I use gRPC? Like larger examples, more complete ones. Documentation is also, it took us weeks to be comfortable digging around the documentation, being able to find what we were looking for. On the search UI, whatever it is, it's you need to know the documentation to be able to navigate it. So I can definitely think it could be improved. And then, I agree with you. You do need to keep the API itself very large, very powerful, be able to express everything. And I do think that at some point, I think a lot of the vendors provide simpler APIs. Istio will provide a simpler API on top of it. And some of that is useful, but I know for our use case, we do need the very bottom because I'll add a feature and I need to use it right now. I'm not going to wait for several layers of abstraction to add it and like plummet way up. But
so thinking about service meshes, they are fundamentally complicated. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Service mesh, Kubernetes, Istio, like this is extremely complicated stuff. It does a huge wide array of things. And I think there's this the idea of accidental complexity versus essential complexity. And as far as I'm concerned, Envoy is very good about not introducing accidental complexity, the unnecessary complexity to something. But it's fundamentally complicated stuff. So I know we're at a service mesh conference, but do you need one? Like, really, that's an important question to ask yourself. If you're building something and you're looking at it and like, do you actually need the complexity of a service mesh? If you do, embrace it. Learn it. It's hard, but it's worth learning. If you don't just add one to have accidental complexity in your system.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I do think that you can pick and choose the complexity though. Like I think the scope of things that you can do, it's a diner menu, but you can pick the things that you need, and don't just kind of get the kitchen sink because it's there. I don't know. We don't have what people really think is a service mesh. We don't have Envoy in front of all of our services. We actually have it only on egress and not on ingress, and that's because we really didn't need it yet. So pick what you actually the problem that you actually want to solve. Start with that, and then figure out what technology or what configuration you need to solve that problem.
Yeah, like I think Envoy is like usually associated with service meshes, but in reality it's just an extremely flexible proxy, and you can use it for whatever you want. And a lot of people like to go for like a full service mesh, but like Ben says, you don't need to. You can, if you just want to use it to do consistent hashing against Redis, you can do that. Like there's nothing, you don't have to use all of it. So yeah, pick the pieces that you actually need.
Cool. Well, that was awesome. Thank you for our panelists. Fun.